as we went into that maintenance staff, they said, no, I got to be able to put it in my pocket. I'm rolling under the floor, under a piece of equipment, or I'm on top of something or around something. I need something smaller that's more handheld.
Welcome to the Voices of Manufacturing, where business leaders across the industry share their unique challenges and insights. Brought to you by Dazuki.
Welcome to the Voices of Manufacturing podcast. I'm your host, Brian Salee. Joining me today is Jacob Rattray from 3M. Welcome to the podcast, Jacob.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Jacob, I'm interested. We're going to be talking about mobile devices and what to consider when thinking about doing a rollout to the factory floor with tablets and other mobile devices. But before we dig in there, you mind giving us a little background on your experience in manufacturing and your current role at 3M?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been with 3M for about 17 years. I started actually at our Ames, Iowa facility, where I was there for about 5.5 years as a manufacturing engineer or mechanical engineering background. I moved up to Hutchinson. I did a little bit more in that space as far as a process engineer. Also have done shift supervisor and the black belt program with 3M. And about the last 4 years, I've been with a group that was called Operational Technology. And really, the goal of that group was to find new technology that's out there and available and bring that out to our manufacturing plants. And I still have a love for manufacturing and a heartbeat for that. That's what I care about. And yeah, that's a little bit about who I am.
Great. Well, yeah, we've known each other for a little while, and I've known about your role, and I've always felt that is probably one of the coolest roles you could have, working for a manufacturing company, be out there scouting technologies and still getting out on the factory floor and helping out there.
I've enjoyed it. In fact, when I took this position, I actually stayed out here in the Hutchinson area and still have a cube actually at the Hutchinson plant just for that very reason, to keep my pulse on manufacturing. I still go in and talk to people there and make sure that we're trying to still solve problems that are real for them.
Yeah, getting in the factory and understanding what's going on there and the challenges. That kind of relates to what we're going to talk about today. We're going to be doing a deep dive into what to consider when you're doing an evaluation. You're starting to consider what type of tablets to bring into the factory. Most manufacturers either have some devices or they're considering rolling out tablets in a broader way to the factory floor. But oftentimes it's difficult to know where to start. There's hundreds of potential tablet solutions, but what solution is going to give your company really the best results depends on a bunch of factors, which I know you have experience with. Before we were recording this, I was going to share Jacob. I asked him how many tablets he had, and he had about 15 tablets in his office. So if there's any doubt about his expertise, that's been disputed now with the tablets in his office there. Jacob, let's dig in. What are some of the use cases that you're seeing for tablets? Because I think everyone gets excited. We need to bring technology in. We need to move away from pen and paper. Eliminate all the paper is something we hear about quite commonly. But what are the actual use cases that are actually bringing value to the factory floor with tablets?
That's a great question. So I think where I kind of got involved was actually when we started working with training software, Dazuki. We saw this ability to always have the most current released version, no longer having to print, and then also being able to access that training anywhere I am throughout the manufacturing floor. So those were kind of the initial use cases that kind of brought us there. I think historically, a lot of managers might have had a cell phone that was used by 3M or purchased by 3M. And there was a lot of controversy about should we be allowing that? Should they be able to take pictures and things like that? And now with this move towards training software as well as other things, it's really just opened the door for a lot broader use cases. So we're seeing our maintenance staff starting to use it for being able to look at crib stock. Do we have that spare part in there? They're starting to actually use it to communicate across the production floor. So instead of having to use the overhead paging system and then call a local phone line in the plant, we're seeing that go through things like Microsoft Teams, chat, and other software solutions like that. So yeah, just a whole host of different things. Even the ability as a supervisor. So in my past, as I mentioned, I was a supervisor. This hour, I called it kind of the witching hour from 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. My shift started at 7, but those 2 hours on either side of my shift start, it was constantly getting pages and running back and trying to find a phone to answer. And now we're starting to see supervising groups to have a cell phone where they can just be mobile and answer those phones in a safe area on the production floor rather than always having to go back to answer a desk phone.
Yeah, it seems like communication is maybe one of the biggest opportunities for improvement with devices. Then, as you're saying, there is now you've got an instant way to connect with people, whereas before you had to go, find a phone to communicate.
Absolutely. Yeah, and even bringing email has been historically a big method of communication, but even getting that to some more, I would say, even potentially generational, but more towards the speed of business, where I can text or Teams chat or something to that effect and get an answer more quickly.
Yeah, I was going to say for the managers, supervisors, those folks, they spending more time out on the floor now because they are equipped with tablets? Is that what you're?
That's the direction we want to go. I'm not sure
Okay,
if we've solved all of the problems yet to get them there more often, but yeah, that's definitely the direction that we're trying to get, and trying to understand how they can spend more time on the production floor, because that's where you can solve problems and provide solutions.
great. I want to dig further here because I think this is the area where a lot of companies struggle is, what tablet to go with, and how do you go about gathering requirements? What are the requirements that you should be considering? And you mentioned a few right there, being able to communicate, do email. Those seem like a lot requirements that would help support management and supervisors. But then there's other users, like you were saying, the maintenance technicians, your operators. So there's a lot to consider here. So I'd like to go through, build out a list of requirements to consider, or at least ones that you guys considered when you were looking at tablets. So let's start with, I'd say, taking photos. How important was it to have, does the camera, how important is that in your decision-making process?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of our, again, historically in manufacturing, we would get old, like a Sony point and shoot or some sort of point and shoot camera. You'd have to go and check it out of the supervisor's office. You'd go take your pictures, you'd download them onto a computer, and then finally have access to them. And by going mobile and having all that access right there, it's a double-edged sword. It allows that speed and agility, but we've done a lot on the back end then from a security standpoint. And when we looked for taking photos, it actually wasn't too hard because most cell phones and tablets this day and age have high resolution cameras and things like that. So one of the things I'd actually maybe start with in the conversation is actually going down towards that question of security and how do you manage your devices. And that's kind of, I jumped into the conversation with 3M. They'd already made some of those choices prior to my entrance into the market of supporting devices on the factory floor. And so that mobile device management, or often called an MDM, was one of the big things that I think is maybe one of your starting points, because that kind of dictates, do I go Windows, Android, iOS? What kind of operating system can my MDM manager control? So that's
Well,
maybe one of the starting points, to be
yeah,
honest.
yeah, let's start right there. And I think there's a lot of folks, this is new when it comes to mobile device management. What does mobile device management enable you to do as an organization?
Yeah, absolutely. So mobile device management software ultimately can do a lot of things. And depending on the one that you pick, it can control basically features or restrictions for your tablet or device. And so I'll just use the experience I have. So here at 3M, they chose to use a Microsoft tool called Endpoint Manager. And then we also went down the road of using an iOS device, an Apple tablet or an Apple iPad, is what I've been scaling and pushing out across our factories. So what that MDM allows us to do is actually we can do a whole host of things around what URLs you can visit or see. So all of a sudden now I can limit with what you call like an allowed list or a white list which websites you can visit. So where that's important is if I'm taking pictures of potentially proprietary or complex processes out on our factory floor, we don't want those secrets to escape. And so if I limit the number of websites you can go to, or if I limit whether your camera is even turned on or off in some cases. We've also are able to do things like not allow you to use Apple ID. So we actually can block Apple ID. And what the reasons we do that is we don't want our data to go back up to Apple iCloud. We actually want it to stay on our server in our process. So your MDM gives you a wide variety of features and restrictions that you can add or remove to your device.
Yeah, and I think that's really the fundamental, what you're saying. This is the foundation. You choose the right MDM. As you're saying, you need to have that control over your data. It seems like is one of the main things that an MDM gives you. I did want to hit on a point there. You mentioned whether the device can actually take a picture, limiting websites. Why is that important to an organization to not allow maybe a device to take pictures in certain areas? And you mentioned not allowing the data to get uploaded to iCloud. Why is that important to you guys?
Yeah, if you're familiar with 3M at all, we do everything from tape to sandpaper to medical devices, a whole host of things that 3M does. And we've got over 100,000 patents as a company. But just as many things that we've patented, we've also done as just internal trade secrets. So some of our methods on how we make some of our products, we've chosen not to patent. We've just said, hey, we're going to keep that secret and proprietary. And that's allowed us to keep that competitive edge longer. Because as soon as you patent it, you start the clock on that patent will run out after so many years. But if you never patent it, you keep that trade secret internal. There's a lot of things that we know how to do better than anyone else, and that's keeping our competitive edge. So definitely something to consider is what I'm taking a picture of. If everyone knew about it, is that going to make me lose my market share, my competitive edge? And for office use, right, iPads, iPhones has always been much more broadly accepted. But now in manufacturing, we're really putting a different scale and a lens on that, where it's saying, hey, yeah, we really need to restrict this down so that we keep that competitive edge, as I mentioned.
Got it. So just to summarize, an MDM is really going to give you control and allow you to control your data, where it's being uploaded, as well as security. Those are the fundamentals of an MDM.
Correct. Yep, absolutely.
Great. Well, moving on, considering MDM, I think that was a great first place to start, because that's going to determine,
Yeah.
Probably what types of devices you consider. What are some other requirements that should be on your list of requirements?
Yeah, going down the list next, what we looked at then would be your operating system, right? So if you go iOS, obviously that's locked into a single manufacturer with a handful of devices, right? So Apple makes iPhones and iPads with a few flavors thereof. When you broaden that out to an Android solution, because Android's open source, you definitely get a much wider variety. And some of the things that we've seen as I've been exposed to this is that with all the flexibility of Android becomes a little bit harder to do some of that through an MDM. And the example I'll give you is if you were to buy a cell phone, you could get a cell phone from Verizon, AT&T Mobile, whoever else, a handful of different providers. Now within there, you can have another layer that would be LG, Samsung, whatever, all the different manufacturers. For every basically matrix thereof, you end up with a different flavor, I guess is a way to say it, of that operating system. It's all Android, but T-Mobile for Samsung might look different than Verizon for Samsung. And then all the different models might have a different complexity. And so with that complexity, you do have to maybe start to standardize on what you're looking for. And so what I mean by that is I wouldn't go out and get an LG tablet, a Samsung tablet, and go down the road and get 15 different devices. Try to get down to what's the one or two models that'll work because of the way you're going to manage those in the back end.
Got it.
So
Yeah.
Windows has a very similar open-endedness as well, maybe not quite as severe as Android.
Yeah. And just out of curiosity, are you guys using any Android tablets at 3M?
So again, prior to my getting involved here and looking specifically at manufacturing, there were some higher level decisions made, whether that was good or bad, towards Apple. And I think the benefits is that Apple can be a little bit maybe strict, I should say, or stingy, where you get what you get and you don't have a whole lot of choice in that, right? This is iOS and this is the operating system and this is an iPad. This is what you get. Obviously, Android has a much broader audience and flavor and variety. So that choice was a little bit made prior to me, but it has also been a benefit because again, that matrix I just described a minute ago, this is all of a sudden limited down much more severely what we can and can't do. We are starting now, this has been 3-4 years ago that decision was made. We are starting now to go back in and pick specific models for specific use cases with Android because they do solve things that Apple does not. I think one of the things that we've seen that Windows and Android have solved that Apple has not gotten in the game with is when it comes to intrinsically safe. And maybe just a brief description of intrinsically safe, it would be an environment in which you have either open fumes or fine dust, anything that could be explosion or chemical safety type related things. So that's where Apple just doesn't have a product. And that's where we're exploring both Windows and Android for that solution.
Yeah, and I think I'd love to hit more on the intrinsically safe point, because I think that's something that comes up with a lot of manufacturers. And there's some, outside of just the tablets, maybe some case solutions that you can get there as well. But before we dig in, I hear a lot of manufacturers and specifically IT teams that, hey, we're a Microsoft shop. We're only going to get Microsoft device, Windows devices, things like
Yep.
that. And you guys are Apple, Android. Sounds like you've also got some Windows and Microsoft tablets as well. Pretty broad coverage there across the different manufacturers. Why is that supported by IT? Why is that okay when you see so many companies that say, hey, we're only going to be a Windows shop or an Apple shop?
Yeah, I think it comes down to the variety of what 3M does, the flexibility. We've got everything. I was actually talking to one of our companies that make roofing granules, and basically like they're crushing rocks. So you have this high dust, high dirt, high debris. And so you go from that all the way to a chemical part of our company where they're mixing two parts together and getting a very specific adhesive or things like that. You get this wide variety, I think, is what has allowed us to do that. I would say by and far 90% of what we do is probably iOS and Apple, but this complexity has allowed us to go down that path of some Windows and a few Android.
Got it. Yeah, it's just an interesting point. The use cases are going to determine which tablets you guys go with. You're not going to be locked into one manufacturer just because maybe that's who you have the best relationship with or have
Right.
bought the most devices from in the past.
Yep.
Um, we'll continue it on here. So we talked about MDM, making sure that you choose the right mobile device management software platform. We've talked about the different manufacturers of tablets. What else should you consider?
Yeah, I think the next thing that I used in considering that was actually the case. So how do I protect this $300, $400, $500 device, right? Or depending on your range, some of them are even cheaper, down to $100. But what I went through is I actually just drove over to our local Best Buy at the time and just started going down the shelf and saying, what are all the different cases? What do they offer? What are the pros and cons? And then I put on that manufacturing hat that I've been in manufacturing now, like I said, for 17 years. So I said, what truly is going to make it faster, easy, simpler, safer for my operator to use? And so what we started looking at is cases that would actually have kind of a two-side or a two-part. Out in manufacturing, if you have just that open iPad or Apple glass kind of exposed, we said this is going to be a lot of factories that have abrasive materials or dust or debris, that chemicals, different things like that. So we said we kind of wanted something that's going to cover both the front and the back as well as the corners. So a two-piece case is what we decided from a durability standpoint. And then from that, also, we looked at having a hand strap, just something to make it quick and easy to hold on to. And then the last thing that I really looked at was also the ability to have that camera readily available. So there's a lot of cases that'll have kind of a what you call like a folio case where you'd be able to cover the front glass when you're not in use, but then that folio then wraps around the back and then covers the camera really in a lot of cases. And we went away from any kind of a folio or a flap or anything that would be dangling or could be in the way. And so those are some of the things we looked at. It was really protecting the front glass. Almost every case has some sort of a drop protection, so that seemed pretty universal. But then it was that hand strap and the ability to keep the camera from being covered. So those were some of the things we looked at.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I love that point about you want to protect the front, the glass of your tablet, your screen. But then if you flip it over and you're blocking the camera, now you're limited in how you can use that tablet. So you actually found cases that you've got that clamshell type of protection, as you're saying, but the camera's still exposed. You can still take pictures when it's open.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Now, I don't know a ton about this, but I've heard there are intrinsically safe cases that can actually take a regular tablet and make them intrinsically safe. How good are those solutions? Are they trustworthy, or is it just all marketing?
No, I think there are some decent solutions out there. It really depends. The conversation gets very complex, and I had to do a lot of my own research and understanding from both experts within 3M as well as some external sources. You actually have a European standard, which is like an ATEX standard, and then you have this US standard. And a lot of times they don't always cross over. They overlap a little bit, but they don't always cross over. So European has what they call class 1, zone 0 and zone 1. And in the US we have class 1, div 1 or division 1 and division 2. And so zone 0 and 1 overlap some with the American standard of class 1. But when it comes to a case, if it is truly a zone 0 or a class 1, that kind of most restrictive solution, there is really no case that will get you there. And the reason being is it's the electronics inside that, if broken open, if you dropped it and the battery becomes exposed and the processor, and that's truly what's going to cause a spark. If you get up a higher level to maybe a ATEC zone, 1 or zone 2 or the US standard division 2, then there are, I think, some very good cases out there that we've investigated and looked at that are going to definitely make that device available in that area.
Got it. So depending on your requirements as a manufacturer, where it's going to be used, potentially you could pair an iPad with one of these cases and it could meet your requirements for intrinsically safe device.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the zone 2 and division 2, those areas are typically, if you got to read the fine print, but it's like, vapors may be present but are not always present, or dust may be present but is not always present. That's that more loose area that you'd be able to get away with. So oil refinery, some chemical processing, thing like that. We have not been able to use any of those solutions because a lot of our areas we try to classify down to that most critical area, and we try to keep that space fairly small. But if you're in that space, it is definitely a higher volume of a ratio of dust or chemicals are present at a higher frequency. And that's just where we've then gone to a device that's specifically made class 1 div 1 in the US for that. And that just becomes much more expensive when you pare down the electronics inside and you do certain things on the hardware itself.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. The next one I want to hit on here seems one of the more complicated ones when it comes to charging and storage, especially if you're running multiple shifts and you need those tablets on each shift. How does that work? What are some things that you guys considered when it comes to charging and storage, and how do you support multiple shifts with tablets?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So I think this is where I personally am branching off to the next level and trying to solve this more deeply. Early on, we started off with just those old file folder racks. If you put paperwork in it's a little rack that you can mount to the wall or to the side of a desk. We really started there and just said mount one of those near an outlet, and you just drop the iPad in that little bin and plug it in. And we're kind of growing over time now and starting to look at much more in-depth products. And one of the things, like you mentioned, multiple shifts and things like that, we've gone to maybe like a check-in or check-out system where I check out that device from maybe a whole cart, and the cart might have either a big power strip, or you can buy special carts that have multiple 5-watt, 10-watt charger type things where you'd plug in 50 or 100 devices, and you could have side A be for shift 1, side B for shift 2, or things like that, where you can start to do a check-in and a check-out. We've also just put general rules out on the production floor. A lot of times we're not using the device 100% all the time. And so if you set it down, we're just saying, hey, go put it back at the charging. If the battery is less than 40%, just go put it back and plug it in. So it's always ready. What I'm starting to look at now, and Brian, you can probably see the pictures in my office, but I'm starting to look at some of these more like inductive charging and magnetic solutions. So I want to be able to just drop it on a charger, not have to fiddle with a cord. We're also starting to occasionally see cables go missing, right? Somebody borrowed it to bring it to lunch. It didn't come back from lunch
Yeah.
break. So we're starting to look at cases and solutions that kind of bring that together, this inductive charging or this quick kind of drop and go solution.
Yeah, and out of curiosity, have you explored? I know for some of the tablets, you can get like a auxiliary battery with your case, and so you can double your battery capacity essentially. Have you guys looked into anything like that?
We haven't seen a need for it yet. A lot of times, honestly, again, we're more towards that Apple, and iPads surprisingly have a pretty good battery life. We're seeing batteries for the use that we're using going a full production shift without having to be charged. Sometimes multiple shifts, just depending on, again, am I sitting there holding it the whole time with the screen on, or is it the interval use, which is where we're at still today, where I'm going to use it for 30 minutes. I'm going to set it down for 2 to 3 hours, use it for 30 minutes. More that I need to refresh myself on some training, or I need to get access to an app or some software that we need. So it's not a constant 8-hour period where it's on all the time for a lot of our cases today. So we haven't gone down that path, but I could see some of the solutions I have here on the floor. It is more of a hard mounted device where it's going to be mounted on a tool cart or mounted on a power source where it's just always on. So we've gone down that path, but not with battery extension, but maybe more with a mounted solution where it'd be kind of like what you'd see at like a kiosk at a
Yeah.
sales desk. If you're going to go check out at a store, they might have an iPad there and it's mounted to the desk, or a kiosk that you'd see it in a store. We've gone that route, but we haven't gone that in between, which is longer battery.
Yeah, the kiosk type of way to manage the tablets is interesting as well. I've seen a lot of companies do that, and you just need to refer to maybe your work instructions or some drawings or something like that. You walk up to the kiosk and then right back to your workstation. So you guys have deployed some kiosks, it sounds like, then for that type of
Yeah, we
use
have.
case.
Yeah, we have. The one I have behind me here on the floor it's a pole that you would be able to bolt to a desk or to a wall, and then the power runs up that pole and is connected to the device right there as you're using it. So that's a device. This solution even has the ability to lock it in place potentially. So that kiosk that we were talking about in, say, like a department store, it would be locked down to that desk or table. So we have seen some of those in maybe a highly manual process. So if I'm assembling a widget,
Yeah.
that would be a good place for something like that because it's always on, it's always mounted at my workstation where I need it. I don't need to be walking the factory floor. Opposite of that, we do have some of our equipment that can be as long as a football field with multiple stories. One of the equipment places where I was a supervisor was 3 stories high and a football field long. Our current solution is you walk all the way back down to what we call the command room or the control area to do whatever you needed to electronically, and then you go back out to the production area and walk up to the second floor or the third floor or wherever you go. And so you really needed that flexibility to walk with the device throughout the work center. So this is starting to solve some of those problems as well.
Yeah, that makes me really think about something we didn't hit on yet, but screen size. And
Mm.
as you're talking about like a kiosk or maybe an assembly type of line or a work cell where you're pretty stationary, you're not moving around a lot, then maybe you can go with a larger screen size. Is that something you guys have looked at, or have you pretty much standardized around just standard iPad size?
No, I'm actually really glad you brought that up. That was something here in the last 6 months that we've just started to work on, and that was historically it was just the base model iPad, which has been either 9.7 or 10.2 inches. So it's been just real basic, and that's where we got the case with the hand strap and the ability to move it around and carry it. As I've started to branch out into that supervisory role, or especially maintenance, actually, let's go down the path of maintenance. A lot of times they're carrying a tool cart or a tool belt or a tool pouch, and having that big iPad, a lot of them are giving me feedback saying that's too bulky. I want to be able to slip it in my pocket like an iPhone. So we've started going down that path of phone size, and really we've gotten to the point where it's pick your flavor. I could say small, medium, or large, right? So
Yeah.
again, with the Apple platform, I could go iPhone, I could go iPad mini, or I could go full iPad. You could even put two more extremes on that where you could go extremely small, where you could go iPad touch or iPod touch, or you could go extremely large where you go to iPad Pro and get this massive 12 or 13-inch screen. For the most part, though, I would say people are really like I'm either carrying it in my pocket for iPhone or I'm kiosk or larger size. So that's been majority of what we've seen. But I do like the fact you brought that up because as we went into that maintenance staff, they said, no, I got to be able to put it in my pocket. I'm rolling under the floor, under a piece of equipment, or I'm on top of something or around something. I need something smaller that's more handheld. So
Yeah, and I've seen it too. We've got some manufacturers that we work with where they're building really large things and constantly looking at the engineering drawings, and they want a big device that they can actually move around and pinch to zoom and really get a look at those drawings. Screen size is definitely a good thing to consider. Last one I want to hit on with you here is really around the people. You've got employees with different levels of comfort when it comes to using devices and technology. And so when you come into an organization and you're trying to implement technology like this, how do you get people on board, and especially those folks who maybe aren't comfortable using tablets yet? How do you get them to feel like this tool is going to help them do their job better?
yeah, if I've done my job appropriately using the right MDM, right management software where we're controlling the things that we need to, if I've picked a device that's the right shape and size for where they're trying to work, hopefully it's an easy sell. A lot of times it's just a matter of showing them that the work that they normally had to go back to a computer for can be done also on this device. And a great thing was actually just last week I was out in our Menominee facility and talking directly with operators on the floor and asking those very questions. Hey, do you use this iPad? And I had some mixed reviews, and I said, were you aware of this functionality? And often showing them that, hey, this what you normally do back at your computer could be done while you're working in that area or here. You don't have to walk the 30 feet, 50 feet all the way back there. As soon as you got them seeing that real world solution and that problem solving, they bought in really quickly and they get really excited. They're like, oh, I didn't know I could do that. Yes, now I'm all in. And maybe one other thing we've done to ease that use has been actually using the Dazuki software to do like introductory guides. So I have what I call like iPad 101, and it's just a series of pretty basic things that most of my generation would laugh at or younger generations laugh at. But here's where the power button is. Here's how you adjust the volume. Here's where the home button. This is what the home button's function is. So it's just even introductory things with a document or a guide gets them kind of ease of use into it. And then The last thing I've tried to do is actually get a process that is a daily rhythm that they can be using the device on a regular basis. And so one example I'll give you is using an iPad, using the Dazuki software on there, we've actually created daily checklists. So things that were traditionally done on paper, we've tried to digitize. And one example would be like every shift when I come into work, if I have a fork truck that I use in my area, I'm supposed to do a daily checklist of that fork truck. So if I'm getting that device in their hands every day and using QR code for them to get directly to the document quickly and easily, they don't have to search for it. They don't have to, dig through layers of folders to find what they're looking for. And then they have it in their hands and they get used to clicking, signing in, signing out. That daily rhythm really has broken down a lot of barriers as well.
That's really great. So it's what's in it for me? How are you going to help them? How's it going to help them do their job better? And then the second piece of that I really like is what do they do every day that you can digitize and get them comfortable, a lot of experience using the tablet. That's tremendous. That's a great idea.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jacob, this has been great. I appreciate the deep dive here. I think this is going to be some really great insights for audiences. There other companies consider rolling out tablets. Any final pieces or words of wisdom for the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the new things that's really coming out and becoming bigger is actually just what I mentioned here at the end is QR code. Traditionally, we've used a lot of 1D barcodes and used that to transfer knowledge and transpose numbers, so you didn't have that. QR codes is really becoming a new way for us to start to do some of that. And I mentioned just that example. I can now put a QR code on a fork, have an operator walk up with the device, scan that, and it takes them directly to the most current release version of the document, as well as digitizes that normally a paper checklist. And so really this is starting to open up a whole bunch more things, right? Where we started with just a training software. And now I've set up the process where I just have a request system where people can say, hey, wouldn't it be great if, and then they just fill in the blank, or I use this app at home, and then we start bringing some of those things in. And so if you've got an app or you see a need, that's really where we're going. And the hard part too is you got all these other things to balance, right? You still have security to balance. If I bring in any and every app, is that put my data at risk? And there's all those things to balance and keep track of. But ultimately, like I've said all along, my heartbeat is always with the manufacturing. And if I can solve a problem for them, if I can take seconds, minutes, hours out of their day, or make it easier, quicker, faster, safer, more reliable, that's ultimately what I'm trying to do. And the tablets out on the production floor, whether it's a phone or a tablet, is really starting to solve those problems.
Yeah, Jacob, I appreciate the time today. That's a great overview on, how to go about selecting a tablet. Appreciate you joining us on the podcast.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Voices of Manufacturing, brought to you by Dazuki. To stay up to date, subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Visit dazuki.com/podcast to learn more.